2025. Incidentally, Nigeria as a country has turned 65. Yes, 65 years of nationhood. And as part of its annual broadcast, the president has also highlighted some of the efforts that have been made, especially in the last 2+ years of his government, to also ensure that corruption, which is one of the cankerworms eating this country in a manner of speaking, is not only tamed but also create safeguards around systems to ensure that they are insulated against this, if you like, all-time destroyer of everything that Nigeria tries to gather economically, politically, and otherwise. And in the last couple of years, one of the legal instruments that Nigeria as a country has employed in warding off corruption is plea bargain. We've seen that play out in several scenarios. As a matter of fact, we are not also ignorant of how that has become, in some instances, controversial, especially when you look at it from the standpoint of political interference. Today, it is appropriate to quiz whether or not that particular phenomenon, I mean the element of plea bargain, has been effective enough in Nigeria's fight against graft. Is the focal point of our conversation on Scale of Justice in this particular episode. I'm Uyi Agmofwegwe. As always, welcome you with so much of delight to the program. We'll take a quick break. When we return, we will unpack it for you. Please do stay with us. My guest on the program this week is Adegoke Kayode. He's an Abuja-based legal practitioner. Kayode, I'd like to say a big thank you to you for coming on the program.
Thank you for having me on.
Great. The other time I ran into you at the Supreme Court, incidentally, you were not being conferred with the title of the essay and just yet.
Not yet.
They were counting down for you.
Of course. Thank you.
All right, let's talk about what we're here for today, which is the issue of plea bargain.
Yeah.
It will appear there's so much of misconception around the whole idea.
Yeah.
In an ideal situation, I mean, you are a lawyer, for example. What is supposed to be the application of this legal instrument?
Well, the application of plea bargain is usually for financial crimes that have garnered sufficient public interest and have the way of affecting public policy. So those are some of the guidelines, those are some of the guardrails where plea bargain is going to be in application.
Interesting. And for a country like Nigeria, well, of course, there's a bit of ignorance on the part of those who particularly are not as informed about legal issues as you are, being that's basically your line of work. I mean, we've been here for 26 years by way of democratic experience, and we've seen that for many people, it really hasn't worked for Nigeria. Talk to us about the peculiarities associated with our own experience in this country.
Regarding
the application, yes, of plea bargain.
Okay, so it's the first thing is plea bargains are recognized by law. For example, Section 270 of the Administration of Criminal Justice Act 2015 recognizes and gives the procedures and the conditions for plea bargain. So in general, the issue is not necessarily with the application of plea bargain, but how monies recovered are re-administered. So we see the discrepancy between corruption and being effective with the fight against graft. So that is, I think, the reason why we are not really seeing the fruits of these innovations in our laws that allow us to recover monies and apply them correctly once they've been recovered.
Incidentally, again, that's another challenge altogether. There are people who say that a country like Nigeria, given where we are today, because our democracy, some people will argue, is still nonsense. All right, we're not supposed to have this kind of instrument of law because they see it as a slap on the wrist for people who have been convicted of, in some cases, misappropriation of public funds running into tens, sometimes hundreds of billions, and things like that. Are there loopholes that maybe politically exposed people are exploiting to the detriment of taxpayers and ultimately citizens?
Well, I think we have to weigh it against the cost. We're looking at the cost of prosecuting these very I don't use the frame politically exposed because it's a loaded term, but the people who are accused of these excessive grafts, there's a line between prosecuting them, the cost, the time, the impact, economic impact, as against the plea bargain, which allows you to recover all, if not most of the money, and then the case is dealt with. The person may plead to a lesser sentence, or the person may be sentenced to a reduced term. The important thing in those circumstances is that the money has been recovered. So the question is, when we have recovered the money, when the Paris Fund is being refunded back to Nigeria, how then is the money being applied? So I think that's kind of where the line is. But if we follow the law, if we follow the due process of the law, as provided for by decided cases and the Administration of Criminal Justice Act, the groundwork is there, the legal framework is there. It's just a matter of how we apply it.
Interestingly, we've also seen, okay, of course, we understand that recovery is a rigorous process in itself altogether. I mean, you have to find a way to pinpoint where the assets are, whether cash or physical items and things like that, some of them offshore and all of that. So it's quite an extensive process, requires a lot of energy and time to pull it off. Well, we understand all of that, but is Nigeria, as it stands today, robust enough? Do we have that sort of robust legal framework, prosecutorial resources to be able to identify where these persons who have been so accused have their assets hidden or stashed away, so that we're able to do substantial recovery, if not 100%?
100%. Nigeria, I personally know that we have extensive training in anti-money laundering and counter financing of terrorism. We have mutual legal assistance agreements with many countries, many of these famous countries where assets are being hidden. We saw with the Panama Papers 9 years ago, where all this information regarding some of our politicians and worldwide, we saw all sorts of countries having their politicians.
One president, from prime ministers.
Yeah, we don't need to mention names, but they had assets in these hidden havens, and the fact that the information is able to come out means that we are also able to track, find, and recover these properties. The only issue is, one, on our own side, the political will, and B, the willingness of the country to relinquish, dispose of, and relinquish those items which they have seized. There are some many famous examples. There was one with somebody from Guinea, where they had done a civil asset forfeiture on, he had a Michael Jackson glove that was worth $12,000, a jacket, some cars, and things like that. And there was an unwillingness on the part of the US government, which had civilly forfeited those assets, to dispose of the items and refund the money back to the nation. So sometimes you have that tug of war between the nation which wants to recover its monies and the countries which are benefiting there.
The assets are domiciled.
1,000%. So I think that's where a lot of times we need to employ diplomacy, the correct type of diplomacy, to ensure that we are able to track our money and recover it back. And of course, the most important part is to ensure the money doesn't get stolen again, and taken back to these jurisdictions again?
Well, I think the issue of tax havens and all of these, where you have shared investments by, again, you said it's a loaded term, politically exposed people,
yes.
It's quite a complex knot to deal with. But let's leave that for a second and talk about mutual legal assistance, which you talked about a while ago. When we see, for example, people who have been accused of very heinous crimes in Nigeria, sometimes financial crimes, in some cases even way beyond that, and the cases drag for years, and then they step out of this country, maybe away from Africa for a second, and then they are nabbed, and then the next thing they are in jail and things like that. And then you talk about, okay, well, we need to find a way to get these people back, to go face the law back at home and things like that. If these mutual legal assistance agreements or understandings are so effective, why does it look like rocket science?
Of course. I think, we have to look at the distinction between law and policy, law and politics. For example, if a Nigerian citizen is, arrested abroad and is being tried there, and the question is, how badly do we want to try him under our laws? The jurisdiction in which that person has been tried, they may not feel that we have the institutional strength to, fully deal with the person, and that's how basically the lines are being drawn, which is, do we feel that the person there will get justice, or do we feel like we can do the person justice here?
It's basically on extradition you're talking about.
Yes, extradition, because that's usually how that works. If somebody has taken money from Nigeria and the person goes somewhere to another jurisdiction and they are able to find him, in fact, the capacity for the host jurisdiction to find him depends on our mutual legal assistance request. We give the other nation information. This is what he looks like. This is his name. This is how he identifies. These are some of the things we believe he's going there to do. So we have that information. We share that intelligence, and a lot of times with a lot of these countries, they work with us to get them and then come back. It's just that some countries, they believe that they have superior jurisdiction to us, for example. There are some cases like that. I think the Hush Puppy case was somehow like that, because the Nigerians had been duped by him allegedly. But the United States government and the FBI felt that they had superior jurisdiction to try him and convict him.
Right. And they took it out of the United Arab Emirates, and now the man is doing time.
Exactly.
We're going to take a quick break at this time, and then we'll talk about the concern that you have raised consistently in the course of our conversation on the program, where you talked about how we, beyond recovery, how we, if you like, reinvest what has been recovered. And of course, these are taxpayers' monies,
yes.
Ultimately. So much to unpack, everyone. After we return from this break, again, Nigeria is 65, and that again has raised quite a number of conversations as to assessment of where we are today as a country and where we may be heading, given the indicators that we're looking at in front of us. We're back shortly. So, Mr. Luke, I understand that when we talk about plea bargain, of course, capital offenses are quite out of the bracket. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
But are plea bargains squarely or strictly limited to financial crimes?
They are not, per se. You can speak about compounding offenses, you can speak about plea bargain. They are kind of birds of the same feather. But generally, the most applicable aspect of plea bargain is when it comes to restitution.
Right.
If it's a capital offense, what is the means of restitution to the victim? Or how can there be restitution So
let's say a case of murder, for example.
That's what I'm saying. How do you restore? What is the means of restitution for somebody who has lost a loved one to a heinous crime? So that's why it generally doesn't work that way when it comes to plea bargain. It's a difficult principle to apply.
If somebody has pled, or if you like, pleaded plea bargain, are they an ex-convict? Because that has been a bit of a tricky question.
Right. So, okay, a lot of times, so plea bargain is divided often into two. You have the charge and you have the sentence. And a lot of times, most of the time, the person has to plead guilty to a lesser offense. So your felony charge can be reduced to a misdemeanor or to a simple offense, depending on how your plea bargain goes. So, of course, a felony is an offense for which you may be imprisoned over 3 years. A misdemeanor is one which is over 6 months, but not up to 3 years, and a simple offense is one which is less than 6 months. So, a lot of times, you will plead guilty. That's the caveat. So
that's the basis.
Yes. So the phrase ex-convict, it involves prison, it involves violent or heinous crimes, long sentences. Well, yes, you will be an ex-convict. But the other side of the caveat is you cannot be tried again for those offenses. And when you successfully plead bargain, there cannot be an appeal on that conviction, for example.
Well, interesting. In the case of Nigeria, I mean, you're a lawyer, you hear a lot, you see a lot, you handle a lot, maybe by way of briefs and all of that.
Yes.
Is it not possible that there has been a sizable amount of political interference in terms of how we, if you like, apply plea bargain, and give me some real-time cases that we've seen in the lifetime of this democracy?
Yes, it's invariable because the people who may be tried for these types of offenses, graft, corruption, embezzlement, by whatever means called, they would have serious political ties.
Right.
And invariably, there will be a little bit of influence, external influence, and the foundation of plea bargain is to ensure that political influence does not weigh on the judicial process. So that's why, as much as possible, the plea bargain tries to ensure that the legal process is maintained and it's not desecrated.
Every time we talk about plea bargain, of course, lawyers like yourself instinctively will make reference to the ACJ 2015 and all of that, which is quite apt and valid. But again, we keep hearing that one of the things plea bargain helps to accomplish is to save the government time, money, and other valuable resources.
Yes.
But are there downsides to plea bargain as a concept in law?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, you have public policy, public interest.
Right.
So the public interest usually may be that, of course, it's very difficult to measure exactly what public interest is. We'll have the faint idea of what public policy is. The public interest is, for example, somebody from Gongola State embezzles state money. So we can deduce that public interest in Gongola State or the rest of the country is for that person to return the money and spend as much time in prison as possible.
Right.
So the issue is how easy is it? How long will it take for us to recover Gongola State monies, and how easy is it for us to get it back? How easy is it for us to ensure that he's convicted? Because, of course, if he's convicted at trial, he can go on appeal, can go to the Supreme Court. That could be a 3, 4, 5 year, 10-year period. So in which period the monies are still there, or the assets are still there, and the plea bargaining concept is, let's reduce that time to a 1 year, 2 year period. Let's recover the money, and we can administer it to the people of Gongola State, for example.
Incidentally, I've spoken to lawyers most times off the records about plea bargaining, and they say that in some instances it can be a bit more complex than we see on the surface. Somebody who has been so accused of maybe outright theft of public funds or assets may have had certain investments in other people's names, their spouses' names, parents, relatives, loved ones, in-laws, what have you, friends, and all of that. Does that further complicate the process in any way?
That's exactly why plea bargaining is employed, because the way money laundering works, the way money can be hidden, money can be transformed, money can be transmuted, I think that's even the better word, into things that belong to other people. And there's not always the best way to say that this thing is the direct proceed of crime. We just have a reasonable suspicion, but is the reasonable suspicion something we can prove beyond a reasonable doubt? Because the threshold for conviction is very, very high. It's higher than in civil cases. So that's why we employ that. That's why we say, look, don't worry, just come, bring these things to us. We won't, we won't sentence you for too long. Just, relinquish what you have. Or also, you can name your co-conspirators. We can convict your co-conspirators. So we see that.
Why you walk away free?
Not free per se, but there's a good
slack.
Yeah, there's a difference between 6 years and 6 months.
Apparently.
Right. So those deals are possible.
You see, well, I don't know how much you can speak to this as we begin to wind down now. We've talked about recovery. Yes, recover all you want. But then let's talk about the transparency and accountability in the process of how that money gets back into the system in the overall interest of, as they say, for the greater good. For example, say an ex-governor is, please, and then says, I can let go of 100 billion I stashed away in so-and-so country, whatever it is, and then that money is recovered by any of the anti-graft agencies. Ultimately, whose responsibility, perhaps I should say statutory responsibility, is it to track and say, follow the money, as they say?
I would say the best institution to do this is the court. It is the court which has been presented with the plea bargain deal.
Right.
So a plea bargain is entered between the prosecution and the defendant. If there's a victim that can be embodied by somebody, that person should also be present. And the person should also have an input. It's just that a lot of times the prosecuting body is the government,
right?
For example. So what I would say is the court is the best administrator of this. And it's not just return the money back to where the money was stolen from. Because from there the money can be stolen again.
Right.
So there could be, and of course the proceedings of the court are public. So if you want to ensure transparency, use the court.
You can track it.
You can track it very easy. So the court can make an order and say, let's go back to Gongola State since it doesn't exist anymore. Gongola State has recovered 100 billion. Okay, for the next 5 years, for the next 10 years, indigenous of Gongola State do not have to pay for JAMB. They don't have to pay for state tuitions to the universities. That can be part of the order because that 100 billion can be administered directly to the citizens through these means. So in that case, it's not really about where is the money, or every citizen knows that I don't have to pay for JAMB, I don't have to pay for state tuition for further education. Things like that. There are ways you can do. You can order that a skills development center should be built in these 3 local governments, for example. I think if we have that, it's a court order. It's something that can be enforced. I think that's the easiest and fastest way of ensuring that monies that are recovered are implemented properly.
All right, I'd like to say a big thank you to you, Barrister Kaide Adegoke, for taking our time. Again, happy independence.
Thank you. Happy independence as well.
Great.
Thank you so much.
All right, so this is where we're leaving it, everyone. We'll continue to, again, on our part, follow the money, talk about all of the efforts government is making, the anti-graft agencies, how they are continuing to advance their own work within the conference of their own mandates to ensure that we cut corruption and every other kind of crime within this frame to its barest. I am Uyag Mofwebe. On behalf of my team, I'd like to say a big thank you to you for investing 25 minutes of your time with us here on Global Television.